And I think, you know, we've talked a lot in our newsroom kind of about Twitter. And actually, when I went from my old Twitter handle to the new one, I actually had to like cut back on the snark because Ariel has a slightly, you know, my old one was pretty snarky, and Ariel has a little stricter policy in terms of voice. But, you know, it's possible to have a voice. It's possible to have a person on the other side of the news feed, right? I mean, there are ways that you can be entertaining without offending anybody if you're careful. Maybe not. I like to think there are. You know, and that also helps a lot. I mean, think about sort of the Twitter feeds. If you enjoy Twitter, you're on it a lot. The people, the accounts that come to mind for me, for example, are not CNN. Okay, it's not ABC. It's like Andy Borowitz, The Fix. People who manage to sort of combine what they're doing with their own personality a little bit. Not so much that it gets in the way, but enough that you look forward to seeing what they have to say when it comes up on your feed. Adding value to what you RT. If you know something, like for example, okay, suppose I'm going to use Dara here. Okay, so suppose I did a story on transportation funding in North Carolina and a problem with it, and I tweeted it like I always do. You retweeted it and you added, Florida is having the same problem. That's adding value, and that's information that you have that other people may not have, right? It's some kind of context. But when you do that, it's more likely to get somebody to RT you, not to go back to the person you RT'd and just RT them, right? And that helps you build your following too. And of course, minding your Twitter manners. We'll get more to that later, but we'll talk more about MTs and RTs. But there's a whole lot of things that people do wrong when they RT people. They cut off who actually said it in the first place, or they change what that person said, but they leave it as an RT, which means retweet. It means I didn't change this. This is what this person tweeted, right? And then you're like, no, I did not say that, you know, President Obama is the Antichrist. No, you know, there's an MT for that, modified tweet. So that's something that will get you not retweeted in a hurry. Okay, becoming a go-to source. I think, you know, the real big stuff here, you already know, but it's just getting to be really consistent about it. Real-time info, and you're doing this, I know, in disasters and storms and things like that, but I mean, it's helpful to have it, you know, basically in real time when you're not having a disaster. If you can live tweet, if there's a news conference going on, let's say the transportation secretary is in town, came to town to cut a ribbon for something, and there's only one photographer there because everybody else is covering a fire downtown. You can actually sort of live tweet sort of the high points of the conference, that there was a great quote that the secretary said. Put it out there on Twitter. You know, be careful, you know, to make sure it's correct. But when you can offer that kind of real-time info, you're keeping people paying attention to what you're going to say next, right? And you're also doing item number 3, you're breaking your own news. And I hate to say this, you know, I mean, I love my business. I'm a fierce defender of journalism, but there's just not enough of us. And a lot of times, especially transportation, it's a hard sell sometimes. You know, so maybe we don't get out there to cover that event that's important. Maybe we don't get a chance to pick up that press release. But you can actually break it on your own. You know what I mean? You can push it out there. And if you get enough response from folks, sooner or later, one of the press people is going to pick it up and say, hey, we should have done this yesterday. Can we get somebody on that? So, you know, don't be afraid to put it out there. You are a primary source of information, and you don't need to be mediated at all times. Promoting and previewing events. Nothing is worse for journalists than to see on Twitter that so-and-so just had a press conference, right? If you're trying to get people's eyes and attention to what you're doing, make sure you let them know what you're doing before it happens, right? Maybe that morning, 10 o'clock, we're going to be talking with yada yada, or maybe you're going to have a video stream of something, or maybe you're going to be releasing a new video today about teen driver safety. You know, let people know it's coming up beforehand instead of telling them what already happened, and then you can tell them afterwards, of course, you know. But it really does help to sort of get people interested in what you're doing. As I said before, RT and curate news stories. You know, one of the things about making sure that your feed isn't all about you is, you know, is RTing things that are interesting, that are in your area, that would be of interest to people who are interested in what you have to say, and that establishes you as a credible source. That establishes you as somebody who's actually using Twitter as part of a community, as opposed to somebody who's sort of shouting out a megaphone with a little blue bird on it, right? Responding promptly, that comes back to sort of answering questions. You know, I can't overstate how important that is. And this is really important. Make sure your contact info is on your Twitter profile. Now, I'm going to go back if I can, or maybe I can't. Let me see. Yeah, I'll go back to my page. And I know this is kind of small and it's going to be hard to read. If you see here, you've got the website is right there. So somebody who happens to be in Twitter, using Twitter through a Twitter app, does not have to go outside of Twitter, open something else, and try to find out what my contact information is. Now, really, I should have my phone number on there. You know, if I were a PIO, I would. But the more information you put in this, the more likely it is that people are going to use it. I mean, a person sitting in a car scrolling through a Twitter feed is not going to go look you up on Google unless they're really mad. No, I mean, you know what I mean? It simply helps people to know that there's a person behind this and a person they can get hold of, because, as we all know, not everything can be settled in 140 characters. And sometimes you may get some interesting news that way. The two-way tweet, sorry. That's my other pun, I apologize. Respond to questions, criticisms, and mentions. And you don't have to thank everybody who RTs you. You don't have to thank everybody who, you know, mentions you. But, you know, if somebody's trying to draw you into a conversation, respond to it, right? And the same thing for questions and criticisms, you know? I mean, if people feel like they're yelling into the void, they yell louder sometimes, and they get nasty, which takes us to our next one, which is don't feed the trolls. There are people, you know, every website, every online community has them, so does Twitter. And our rule at RAL, and I think this is a good one, is answer once. You know what I mean? And some of them will try to come back and draw you in, and just don't go there, because not only is it a waste of your time, it turns other people off. Don't spam tags, and that's another one of my favorite gripes. I have friends, a lot of people have multiple sort of Twitter feeds, and I know a lot of DOTs do too. If you're going to post something to a tag, just post it once. Don't say, okay, I'm going to tag this Raleigh, and then I'm going to post it on the I-40 feed, and I'm going to post it on the I-80 feed, but it's going to come up in the Raleigh feed like 10 times when you do that, right? I mean, it's going to keep showing up. So use the tag, but don't spam it, because people will start blocking you. RTing other people to tweets as appropriate, and that's another issue. I mean, you may have different organizational guidelines for what's acceptable in terms of retweeting things. Who you can retweet. A lot of people will put a little note on their profile that says retweeting does not equal, you know, agreement or whatever. You just have to be really careful, you know, who you're retweeting. I mean, I remember we had, during the cover, it was Irene, I think it was a couple of years ago here, and there was a lot of coverage going on an Irene tag, yay. And so, you know, we had people RTing other people's tweets, sort of replying, you know, that they have 3 feet of water here, or this road is washed out here, and all of a sudden you have to stop and go, wait a minute, who's telling me this? I mean, at some point you're sort of trying to balance between, well, that's good information, that maybe crowdsourced information on the ground where we don't have any cameras and nobody knows what's going on, versus, I mean, how accurate really is that? So you have to sort of weigh that. Be consistent, and that's another thing. You know, it's like, if you have multiple people that are working on your Twitter account, the best thing to do is to make sure you're all on the same page about how you should use it, about answering people, about what kind of voice you want to use, right? It's really best, most really good Twitter accounts do best when they have one person sort of owning them. That doesn't mean they never share, that doesn't mean other people don't post to them, but that means it's sort of dominated by one voice. You can pull it off. A lot of organizations manage to pull it off, but I think they have some help from like a central person in most cases who sort of helps them craft the message. Contact information, as I was saying, should be available in the app so that people who want to know more about what you just tweeted can find you quickly and ask you. It goes back to that whole two-way thing. And then the mention and direct message notifier. Now, this is sort of a geeky thing, but I don't know how many of you actually have your direct messages ping through to your mail, your mentions and your direct messages. And the same should be for Facebook messages as well. If somebody's direct messaging you, they really want to talk to you, right? And you alone. So you should always make sure that your accounts are set up to, you don't have to get a ting every time you're mentioned, but you should definitely get an alert when somebody has direct messaged you so that you can go and respond to that.